I'm Amanda, 28. 5 years ago, my father screamed at me for asking for $200 to buy textbooks for college. "Stop being so needy," he yelled, his face red with genuine disgust. That same week, he handed my younger sister a brand new BMW for her birthday. I never asked them for anything again. Yesterday, Forbes magazine called our family home to schedule an interview about my $50 million startup. My father answered the phone. The silence that followed was absolutely priceless. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to explain how we got here, because trust me, this journey was anything but easy. I started working when I was 12. Not because it built character or taught me responsibility, but because if I wanted anything beyond the absolute basics, I had to earn it myself. While other kids were playing video games or watching cartoons, I was babysitting the Henderson twins down the street for $5 an hour. Mrs. Henderson paid me in crumpled bills and always acted like she was doing me some enormous favor. My parents, David and Margaret Walsh, owned a successful accounting firm in suburban Denver. Money was never tight in our household. They drove matching Audis, took annual trips to Europe, and belonged to the country club where they played tennis every Saturday morning. But somehow, when it came to their eldest daughter, their wallets developed an interesting condition. My sister Emma, 3 years younger than me, never experienced this particular family quirk. Emma needed new clothes. Mom was at the mall the same afternoon. Emma wanted violin lessons. Dad had the instructor's number memorized. Emma expressed interest in horseback riding. Within a week, she had her own riding boots and was enrolled at the most expensive stable in town. Meanwhile, I worked at the library after school for minimum wage, shelving books and helping elderly patrons find their romance novels. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was kind enough to let me do homework during slow periods, which was probably the only reason I managed to keep my grades up. "Why don't your parents help with your expenses?" she asked one afternoon, watching me count my meager pay. "They believe in teaching independence," I replied, using the explanation I'd heard my mother give to nosy neighbors. What I didn't say was that this independence seemed to be a lesson reserved exclusively for me. By 16, I was working 3 part-time jobs: the library, weekend babysitting, and helping out at a local diner during busy periods. I saved every penny for college, knowing that unlike Emma's guaranteed full ride through family connections, I'd need scholarships and financial aid to afford anything beyond community college. The day I received my acceptance letter to Colorado State University with a partial academic scholarship, I practically floated home. Finally, something to make my parents proud. Something to prove that all those years of working instead of participating in school activities had been worth it. I found them in the kitchen, celebrating Emma's acceptance into some expensive summer art program in France. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom said absently when I shared my news, not looking up from the brochure she was studying. "Emma, this program includes studio time with actual Parisian artists." "How exciting," Dad nodded enthusiastically. "We should call your Aunt Susan. She'll want to hear about Emma's opportunity." My college acceptance might as well have been a grocery list for all the attention it received. That night, I lay in my room calculating and recalculating my budget for freshman year. Even with the scholarship, I'd need money for textbooks, meal plans not covered by financial aid, and basic necessities. The numbers were tight, but manageable if I could keep working part-time during school. I had no idea that asking for help with just one small expense would lead to a confrontation that would change everything between us forever. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in late July. I'd spent the day working a double shift at the diner, my feet aching and my uniform smelling like French fry oil. Emma was upstairs packing for her art program in France, calling down periodically to ask Mom about which clothes to bring. I found my parents in Dad's home office, surrounded by bank statements and investment portfolios. They looked prosperous and content, the picture of American success. This was my chance to ask for help with something reasonable, something small. "Dad, I've been going over my college budget," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I've saved enough for tuition and room and board, but I'm about $200 short for textbooks this semester. I was wondering if maybe you could help me out." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Dad looked up from his paperwork, his expression shifting from mild attention to something harder to read. "$200 for books?" he asked, as if I'd requested funding for a luxury cruise. "Yes, for my core classes." I checked with the bookstore, and that's the minimum I'll need for used books. Mom glanced between us, her mouth pulling into that thin line I knew meant trouble. "Amanda, we've been very clear about our expectations regarding your education. You received a scholarship, which is wonderful, but the rest is your responsibility." "I understand that, but it's just $200. I'll pay you back as soon as I can pick up more hours at work. Dad's response hit like a physical blow. Stop being so needy, Amanda. You're always coming to us with your hand out. When are you going to learn to handle things yourself? Needy. The word echoed in my mind as I stared at my father. This from the man who just spent $3,000 on Emma's art program without blinking. The man who'd bought her a car last month because she mentioned that walking to her summer job was inconvenient. I work 30 hours a week, I said quietly. I've been working since I was 12. I save every penny. This is the first time I've asked for financial help with anything school-related. And that's exactly why you should have planned better, Mom chimed in. If you knew you needed money for books, you should have saved more. The logic was so twisted it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. A door closing that would never open again. You're right, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I should have planned better. I should have planned for having parents who'd spend more on my sister's art supplies than they'd consider spending on my education. Dad's face flushed red. Don't you dare take that tone with us. Emma has talent that deserves investment. She has potential. And there it was. The truth they'd never quite said out loud. Emma had potential. I was just needy. I see, I said, backing toward the door. Well, I'll figure it out myself. I always do. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Emma laughing on the phone with one of her friends, describing the art studios she'd soon be working in. I passed her open doorway and saw the new BMW keys glinting on her dresser, right next to the credit card Dad had given her for emergencies during her trip. In my room, I opened my laptop and started researching textbook rental programs, used book exchanges, and work-study opportunities. I would figure it out myself. I always did. But something fundamental had shifted that evening. The last small hope I'd harbored that my parents might someday see me as worthy of their investment had died. In its place grew something harder and more determined. I would succeed despite them, not because of them. And someday they'd realize exactly what they'd lost when they chose to see me as needy instead of hardworking, as a burden instead of a daughter with unlimited potential. I just had no idea how dramatic that realization would eventually be. Moving into the dorms at Colorado State was like stepping into a different universe. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my family's dynamics. To my roommate Jessica and the other students on our floor, I was just Amanda, the responsible girl who always seemed to have her life together. If only they knew how thin that togetherness really was. I'd managed to solve the textbook crisis through a combination of resourcefulness and pure stubbornness. I found a work-study position in the campus bookstore that came with a small employee discount, rented the most expensive books, bought the cheapest ones used online, and convinced 2 professors to let me borrow copies from the library reserve section. It took weeks of planning and careful budgeting, but I'd done it without asking my parents for a single penny. Your parents must be so proud of how independent you are, Jessica said one evening, watching me organize my color-coded study schedule. They definitely taught me to be self-sufficient, I replied, which was technically true, even if the teaching method had been more abandonment than guidance. The distance from home did something unexpected to me. For the first time, I wasn't constantly comparing myself to Emma or walking on eggshells around my parents' financial decisions. I was just myself, working hard and making friends who appreciated my work ethic rather than seeing it as evidence of inadequacy. That's how I met Marcus, Tyler, and Sarah, and we were all in Professor Henderson's entrepreneurship class, randomly assigned to the same group project. Our assignment was to develop a business plan for a hypothetical company, but Marcus had bigger ideas. Why make it hypothetical? He asked during our first meeting. What if we actually tried to build something? Tyler, a computer science major with an impressive collection of vintage band t-shirts, nodded enthusiastically. I've been working on this app idea for tracking and optimizing study habits. Nothing like it exists in the market. Sarah, who was majoring in marketing, pulled out a notebook already filled with ideas. Student productivity is a huge market, especially if we can make it affordable and user-friendly. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely excited for the first time in months. What if we expanded beyond just study habits? Time management, goal setting, productivity tracking for students and young professionals. The 4 of us spent the next 3 hours in that cramped study room, building on each other's ideas, sketching out features, and dreaming bigger than any of us had ever dreamed alone. By the end of the semester, our hypothetical business plan had turned into a real prototype, and our friendship had turned into a genuine partnership. We called our company Momentum because that's what we were building together. Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized your real family might not be the people you were born to? Drop a comment below about a time when friendship changed your life's direction. While my new life was flourishing, my relationship with my actual family was deteriorating into a series of increasingly awkward phone calls. Emma would update me on her various adventures and achievements, genuinely excited to share her news. My parents would ask perfunctory questions about my grades and remind me to be responsible with money, as if I'd ever been anything but. The contrast became especially stark during winter break. I returned home to find Emma's art from France prominently displayed throughout the house, while my Dean's List certificate sat unopened on the kitchen counter where I'd left it the day I got home. "How's your little business project going?" Dad asked during one particularly tense dinner. "It's going well. We're actually getting some real traction with beta testing." "That's nice, dear," Mom said, the same tone she'd used to acknowledge a child's finger painting. "Just remember not to let it interfere with your studies." Emma, to her credit, seemed genuinely interested. "What does your company actually do?" As I explained our productivity app and the positive feedback we were getting from test users, I watched my parents' expressions. They looked politely bored, the way they might listen to a stranger's vacation slides. Emma, meanwhile, was asking intelligent questions and offering encouraging comments. It struck me that my little sister understood and supported my ambitions more than our parents ever had. "You know what's weird?" I told Marcus during a late-night phone call from my childhood bedroom. "My sister gets it. She actually listens when I talk about what we're building." "Maybe she's the smart one in the family," Marcus replied, and we both laughed. I had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. College flew by in a blur of late-night coding sessions, business plan revisions, and increasingly successful beta tests. By senior year, Momentum wasn't just a student project anymore. We had real users, actual revenue, and the kind of growth metrics that made people take notice. I maintained my work-study jobs because the startup income was still unpredictable, but my 3 partners and I spent every free moment building something that felt genuinely important. Our productivity platform was helping students manage their time better, reduce stress, and achieve their goals. The validation from users was addictive in the best possible way. "We need to make a decision," Tyler announced during one of our weekly meetings at our favorite coffee shop off campus. "Do we stay small and comfortable, or do we really go for it?" Sarah spread her laptop across the table, showing us growth projections that made my heart race. "We've got 3 investment firms interested in talking to us. Real money, real acceleration." Marcus looked at me. "What do you think, Amanda?" "You've been quiet." I thought about my parents, who still asked about my little business project, with the same tone they might use to ask about a hobby. I thought about all the nights I'd worked multiple jobs while my classmates partied, all the times I'd chosen responsibility over fun, all the years I'd proven my worth through actions rather than inheritance. "Let's go for it," I said. "Let's build something that matters." Graduation day was a study in contrast. My parents attended, looking appropriately proud as they took photos and made small talk with other families. They congratulated me on my degree and my job prospects, treating Momentum like a nice extracurricular activity that would look good on a resume. Emma, meanwhile, pulled me aside after the ceremony. "I've been following your company online," she said quietly. "Amanda, this is incredible. You guys are going to change everything." "Thanks, Em. That means a lot." Do Mom and Dad know how big this actually is?" I looked across the lawn at our parents, who were discussing Emma's upcoming graduate program with the enthusiasm they'd never shown for my entrepreneurial efforts. "I don't think they'd understand even if I explained it." Emma frowned. "That's their loss." Over the following months, as Momentum grew from a promising startup to a genuine success story, my family's response remained frustratingly consistent. During our monthly phone calls, I'd try to share milestones that genuinely excited me, reaching significant user numbers, closing important partnerships, hiring our first employees, but their reactions never evolved beyond polite interest. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom would say when I mentioned we'd hit 100,000 active users. "Just make sure you're saving money for the future." Meanwhile, Emma's graduate school updates were met with detailed questions, enthusiastic support, and genuine engagement. When she made Dean's List, Dad called 3 relatives to share the news. When I told them we'd been featured in a tech magazine, he said, "That's nice, honey," and immediately changed the subject to Emma's thesis project. The disparity became so absurd it was almost funny. Almost. "Do you think they'd care more if I failed spectacularly?" I asked Marcus one afternoon as we reviewed our latest user retention numbers. "Maybe they're intimidated," he suggested. "Some parents struggle when their kids surpass their understanding of success. Or maybe they just don't see me as capable of real success," I replied, which felt closer to the truth. The success of Momentum was validating in ways I'd never expected. Investors took me seriously. Users appreciated our product. Tech journalists wanted to interview me about our growth strategy. But the people whose opinion had once mattered most to me remained stubbornly unimpressed. It would take a phone call from Forbes magazine to finally get their attention. And by then, their reaction would reveal truths about our family that none of us had fully understood. The monthly family dinners became exercises in polite torture. Every few weeks, I'd drive back to Denver, sit at the same dining room table where I'd once begged for textbook money, and listen to detailed discussions about Emma's graduate research while my own achievements were dismissed with generic pleasantries. "Emma's professor thinks her thesis could be groundbreaking," Mom would announce, beaming with pride. "That's amazing," I'd respond genuinely, because Emma's work in sustainable architecture really was impressive. Then Emma would ask, "How's momentum doing, Amanda?" I'd share our latest milestone, reaching 500,000 users or signing a major corporate client, and watch my parents' eyes glaze over like I was reading from a technical manual. "That's nice, dear," Dad would say before immediately steering the conversation back to Emma's academics or their own business concerns. The contrast was so stark it became almost surreal. Emma would mention getting a B+ on a paper, and Dad would suggest celebrating with dinner at their favorite restaurant. I'd mention that Momentum had been selected for a prestigious tech accelerator program, and Mom would ask if I was remembering to eat vegetables. "I don't understand them," I confided to Sarah during one of our strategy sessions. "It's like they're physically incapable of seeing me as successful." "Some people can only understand success in forms they recognize," Sarah replied. "Your parents understand traditional careers, real estate, investments. A tech startup might as well be magic to them." But it felt like more than confusion. It felt like willful blindness. The worst part was how normal everyone acted. Emma was genuinely excited about my success and would ask thoughtful questions about our business strategy. My parents weren't actively hostile. They just seemed fundamentally unable to compute that their elder daughter might be building something significant. During one particularly awkward dinner, Dad spent 20 minutes explaining his new client's complex tax situation to the table, clearly expecting everyone to find it fascinating. When he finished, I mentioned that we'd just hired a former Google executive as our head of operations. "That's nice," Mom said absently. "Emma, tell us more about your internship applications." I caught Emma's eye across the table. She looked as uncomfortable as I felt. After dinner, Emma followed me to my car. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For how they treat you. It's not fair." I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved myself enough, they'd finally see me the way they see you. Amanda, the way they see me isn't necessarily better. They see me as their project, their reflection, but they see you as your own person, even if they don't understand what you're building. "Are you sure about that?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they don't see either of us clearly." I drove home that night thinking about Emma's words. She was right that our parents' attention came with its own burden of expectations, but at least it was attention. At least her achievements mattered to them. I had no way of knowing that within a few months, everything would change. The phone call that would force my parents to finally pay attention to my success would also reveal secrets that would recontextualize every family dinner, every dismissive comment, every moment of feeling invisible in my own home. Some truths, once revealed, change everything that came before them. By year 3 post-graduation, Momentum had evolved beyond anything we'd imagined in that cramped college study room. We'd raised 2 rounds of funding, expanded our team to 30 employees, and our platform was being used by over 2 million students and young professionals worldwide. I'd moved into a sleek downtown Denver apartment, finally able to afford the kind of life I'd always imagined. My work was meaningful, challenging, and financially rewarding in ways that still felt surreal sometimes. But success, I discovered, was a lonely thing when the people who should be proudest of you remained stubbornly unimpressed. "We're being featured in Entrepreneur magazine next month," I told my parents during our regular phone call. "That's wonderful, dear." Mom replied in the same tone she'd used to acknowledge that I'd had a nice lunch. "How's your health insurance situation?" It was like speaking different languages. I'd describe closing a 7-figure contract, and they'd ask if I was saving enough for retirement. I'd explain our expansion into international markets, and they'd worry about whether I was working too many hours. Meanwhile, Emma's graduate school progress was discussed with the detail and enthusiasm of a military campaign. Every professor's comment, every research breakthrough, every conference presentation was analyzed and celebrated. "I think they're proud of you," Emma insisted during one of our sister phone calls. "They just don't know how to express it." When you got accepted to graduate school, Dad called everyone he knew. When I got featured in TechCrunch, he asked if I was sure the company was legitimate. Maybe they're intimidated by their own daughter? But Emma's suggestion stuck with me. Maybe my parents' dismissiveness wasn't about my achievements themselves, but about their inability to understand or relate to my success. They could comprehend Emma's academic path because it followed a structure they recognized. My entrepreneurial journey was foreign territory. The realization didn't make the family dinners less frustrating, but it gave me a framework for understanding their behavior. They weren't necessarily rejecting my success. They were rejecting what they couldn't understand. You know what's funny? Tyler observed during one of our leadership team meetings. Your parents treat your success like it's not real, but investors take one look at our metrics and want to throw money at us. Different worlds, I agreed. Different definitions of legitimacy. Marcus leaned back in his chair. What happens when those worlds collide? What do you mean? I mean, what happens when your success becomes so obvious, so undeniable, that even they can't ignore it? I thought about Marcus's question as we prepared for our next major milestone. We were in talks with several acquisition companies, and the numbers being discussed were staggering. Success on a scale that would be impossible to dismiss or misunderstand. When that happens, I said slowly, I guess we'll find out who my parents really are. None of us could have predicted how dramatically that collision would occur, or what family secrets it would uncover in the process. What do you think will happen next? Will Amanda's parents finally recognize her success? Or will their response reveal something deeper about the family dynamics? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in our conference room reviewing quarterly projections with my team when my assistant knocked on the door. Amanda, there's someone from Forbes magazine online too. Says it's regarding an interview. My team looked up with excitement. Sarah actually clapped her hands. Forbes? Amanda, that's huge. I stepped out to take the call, my heart racing. Forbes had been on our dream list of media outlets, but we'd never officially reached out to them. Ms. Walsh, this is Jennifer Martinez from Forbes. We're working on a feature about innovative young entrepreneurs, and your company momentum has caught our attention. We'd like to schedule an interview about your journey building a $50 million startup. $50 million. The acquisition offers we'd been considering had leaked somehow, or maybe they'd done their own valuation research. Either way, hearing that number attached to our company in a Forbes context felt surreal. I'd be honored, I managed to say. When were you thinking? Would next week work? We're looking at a cover story for our next issue. Cover story. I had to sit down. After finalizing the details, I returned to the conference room where my team was practically vibrating with excitement. Cover story, I announced, and the room erupted in cheers. Tyler grabbed his laptop. We need to prep talking points. Sarah, can you handle potential photo shoot coordination? Marcus, let's review our growth metrics one more time. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. We refined our story, organized our data, and polished our presentation materials. I even bought a new suit, something sophisticated enough for a Forbes cover. But as the interview approached, I found myself thinking about my family. This was the kind of recognition that would be impossible to dismiss or misunderstand. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of hope that maybe, finally, my parents would see what I'd accomplished. I decided not to tell them about the interview ahead of time. I wanted their reaction to be genuine, unfiltered by expectations or preparation. The interview itself went better than I'd dreamed. Jennifer Martinez was thorough, insightful, and genuinely impressed by our growth story. The photographer captured shots that made me look confident and successful, exactly the image we wanted to project. This will run in next month's issue, Jennifer told me as we wrapped up. Congratulations, Amanda. You've built something remarkable. That evening, I called Emma to share the news. Forbes cover story? She shrieked so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Amanda, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Em. It still doesn't feel real. When do Mom and Dad get to find out? When the story runs. I want to see their reaction when they discover it naturally. Emma was quiet for a moment. You know they'll be proud, right? They have to be. We'll see. But I should have known that my family had their own way of surprising me. The Forbes call I'd been expecting to make wouldn't come from me at all. It would come to them. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone, debating whether to give my parents a heads up about the Forbes story before it went to print, when Dad's name appeared on my screen. He never called during business hours. Never. Hi, Dad. Amanda. His voice sounded strange, tight. I need to ask you something. Okay. A woman from Forbes magazine just called here. She was looking for you, said something about scheduling an interview about your... He paused and I could hear papers rustling. Your $50 million startup. The silence stretched between us. I could picture him in his home office, staring at whatever notes he'd scribbled during the call, trying to make sense of information that didn't fit his understanding of his elder daughter's life. Is that real? He asked finally. Such a simple question. Is that real? As if the past 5 years of building, growing, succeeding had been some elaborate fantasy that a magazine call might finally confirm or deny. Yes, Dad. It's real. More silence. I could hear Mom's voice in the background, asking who was on the phone. 50 million? Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. The acquisition offers we're considering, yes, though we haven't decided whether to sell or continue growing independently. Acquisition offers. Multiple offers. 3 serious ones, actually. Margaret, Dad called out, and I heard his hand muffling the phone as he spoke to Mom. When he came back, his voice was different. Louder. More animated. Amanda, why didn't you tell us? How long has your company been worth this much? It was a fair question, and I considered several possible answers. Because you've never seemed interested. Because you treat my work like a hobby. Because I stopped trying to impress you years ago. The valuation has grown over time, I said instead. We've been successful for a while now. A while. Dad repeated the phrase like he was testing foreign words. How long is a while? Dad, our company has been profitable for 2 years. We've had acquisition interest for 8 months. This isn't sudden. But you never said anything about $50 million, Amanda. That's not something you just forget to mention. The irony was incredible. Years of trying to share my success, years of being dismissed, and now he was upset that I hadn't told him about the magnitude of what I'd built. Actually, Dad, I've been trying to tell you. Every family dinner, every phone call, I've talked about our growth, our partnerships, our funding rounds. You always seemed more interested in Emma's coursework. That's different. He trailed off, probably realizing he was about to say something that would reveal exactly why I'd stopped sharing details with them. Amanda? Mom's voice came through the phone. Dad had apparently put me on speaker. Honey, we had no idea you were building something so significant. I know. The woman from Forbes, she wants to interview you for their cover story, Dad continued. Cover story, Amanda. Forbes magazine. I know, Dad. I already did the interview. You already, he sputtered. When? Last week. And you didn't tell us? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. They were hurt that I hadn't shared this milestone with them, but they couldn't seem to understand that I'd been sharing milestones with them for years. They just never bothered to listen. Listen, Dad said, his voice taking on a tone I recognized from his business calls. We should celebrate. This is incredible news. Why don't you come for dinner this weekend? We can talk about your success, your future plans. For the first time in our conversation, I smiled. I'd like that. Good. We'll make reservations somewhere special. This deserves a proper celebration. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the Denver skyline, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation about spending time with my family. Maybe this was the turning point we'd all needed. Maybe success on this scale was finally large enough to bridge the gap between us. I should have known that with my family, nothing was ever that simple. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Denver look like a postcard. I drove to my parents' house feeling optimistic for the first time in years, wearing the new dress I'd bought specifically for this celebration. They'd made reservations at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every major family milestone since I was 12. The gesture felt significant, like they were finally ready to include my achievements in the family narrative. Emma met me in the driveway, practically bouncing with excitement. I can't believe my sister is going to be on the cover of Forbes magazine, she said, wrapping me in a hug. It still feels surreal, I admitted. Mom's been telling everyone she talks to. The mailman, the grocery store clerk, her book club. She's so proud. The warmth in Emma's voice made my chest tight with unexpected emotion. Maybe this really was the new beginning I'd hoped for. Inside, my parents looked different. Dad kept checking his phone, as if waiting for news from my Forbes interview to break. Mom had made her famous lasagna, the recipe she usually reserved for Christmas and birthdays. There's our entrepreneur, Dad announced as we walked in, and for the first time in my adult life, he sounded genuinely impressed by something I'd accomplished. Dinner started exactly the way I'd always hoped it would. They asked detailed questions about Momentum's growth trajectory, our user base, our revenue streams. Dad wanted to understand our business model, and Mom asked about our company culture. I found myself sharing stories I'd never told them, explaining challenges we'd overcome and victories we'd achieved. The Forbes journalist said you're being compared to some of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country, Mom said, beaming. She mentioned you in the same breath as those young men who started Facebook and Google. That's incredibly flattering, though I think they're being generous with the comparison. Don't sell yourself short, Dad said firmly. What you've built is remarkable. I had no idea you were operating on this level. The validation felt like sunshine after years of winter. This was the conversation I'd imagined having with them countless times. Finally, they saw me. We made it through appetizers and most of the main course before everything fell apart. So, Dad said, setting down his wine glass and leaning forward with the expression he wore when transitioning to business matters. We need to talk about next steps. Next steps? I asked, though something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Well, this changes everything for our family, he continued. Emma's going to graduate soon, and she'll need a career path. With your success, it seems obvious that she should join your company. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Emma should become a partner in Momentum, Dad said matter-of-factly. Family helps family, Amanda. You've done the hard work of building the foundation, but now it's time to include your sister in the success. The restaurant noise faded into background static. Dad, Emma is studying architecture. She has her own career goals. Architecture is a struggling field, Mom chimed in. But technology, especially your technology, that's the future. Emma could learn the business side, help with operations. I looked at Emma, who appeared as shocked as I felt. Her face had gone pale and she was shaking her head slightly. I don't want anything from Amanda's company, Emma said quietly. That's her achievement, not mine. Dad waved dismissively. Don't be modest, sweetheart. You're family. Amanda built this with family support, so it's natural that family should benefit. Family support. The phrase was so absurd I almost laughed. What family support? The family that had refused me $200 for textbooks? The family that had dismissed my work for years? Actually, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, I built this without any family support at all. I built it despite family indifference. Now, Amanda, Mom said in her warning tone, don't be dramatic. We've always supported your ambitions. Have you? I asked. Because I distinctly remember begging for help with textbook money and being told I was too needy. I remember sharing every milestone for the past 5 years and having it dismissed. I remember feeling invisible at every family dinner until Forbes called your house. Dad's face was reddening. That's not fair. We didn't understand the scope of what you were building, because you never bothered to listen. Well, we're listening now, he said firmly. And as your family, we think Emma should be brought into the company as an equal partner. Equal partner. For work she'd never done. In a company she'd never built, using knowledge she'd never acquired, equal partner because she was family, and family deserved to benefit from my success. I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped against the floor. Amanda, Mom said sharply, sit down. We're having a family discussion. No, I said quietly, we're not. I walked out of Romano's, leaving my family sitting at their table with their grand plans for redistributing my success. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with shaking hands, finally understanding what had just happened. They hadn't called this dinner to celebrate my achievements. They'd called it to figure out how to profit from them. Some truths are only visible in the harsh light of expectation, and the truth about my family was uglier than I'd ever imagined. The next morning brought the inevitable phone calls. First Mom, then Dad, both trying variations of the same theme. I'd misunderstood their intentions. They just wanted what was best for the family. Surely I could see the wisdom in keeping success within the family circle. I ignored them both. Emma's call came in the afternoon. Unlike our parents, she sounded genuinely distressed. Amanda, please tell me you know I had nothing to do with that disaster last night. I know, Em. Your face said everything. I'm mortified. I had no idea they were planning to ambush you like that. It's not your fault. Can I come over? I need to explain something to you. Something important. An hour later, Emma sat in my living room clutching a cup of tea with both hands, looking younger than her 25 years. There's something you need to know, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I should have told you years ago, but I promised Mom I wouldn't. My stomach dropped. What kind of something? Emma took a shaky breath. You're not Dad's biological daughter. The words hung in the air like smoke, visible but not quite real. I heard them, understood the individual meanings, but couldn't process them as a complete thought. What? Dad isn't your father. Your biological father is someone else. I overheard Mom and Dad talking about it when I was 15. They didn't know I was listening, but they were discussing whether to tell you before you turned 18. I set down my own cup with hands that suddenly felt disconnected from my body. That's not possible. It is possible. And it explains everything, Amanda. The way they've always treated you differently. The way they've never seemed to fully accept you as part of the family. You're not. But Dad's name is on my birth certificate. He adopted you when you were a year old. Your biological father. Mom got pregnant with you when she was dating someone else. She chose Dad instead, and he agreed to raise you as his own. The room was spinning slightly. Or maybe I was spinning, and the room was staying still. Who knows this? Mom and Dad. And now you. I don't think anyone else in the family knows. And you've known for 10 years? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to tell you so many times, especially when they'd dismiss your achievements or treat you like you didn't matter. But I was 15 when I found out, and Mom made me promise to never say anything. She said it would destroy the family. 28 years. 28 years of feeling like I didn't quite fit, like I was somehow deficient, like I had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition. 28 years of wondering what was wrong with me, that my own parents couldn't love me the way they loved Emma. "Does this change how you feel about me?" Emma asked softly. I looked at my sister, her blonde hair and blue eyes so similar to our mother's, so different from my brown hair and hazel eyes. Details I'd never questioned before suddenly seemed significant. "You're still my sister," I said firmly. "You're the only person in this family who's ever truly supported me. But now you know why they've always been different with you. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it." A terrible clarity was settling over me. The textbook money they'd refused while buying Emma a car. The way they'd dismissed my business success while celebrating Emma's academic achievements. The assumption that I should share my success with Emma, their real daughter. "Do you think my biological father knows I exist?" "I don't know. Mom never mentioned him by name in the conversation I overheard." My phone buzzed with another call from Dad. Not Dad. From David Walsh, the man who'd legally claimed me as his daughter while emotionally rejecting me for nearly 3 decades. I declined the call. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked. I thought about the Forbes interview, about the success I'd built entirely on my own, about the family who'd never truly seen me as belonging to them. The irony was perfect. They'd waited until I was successful enough to profit from before showing interest in my achievements, not knowing that my success would ultimately lead to discovering why they'd never valued me in the first place. "I'm going to find out who my real father is," I said. "And then I'm going to decide which family actually deserves to be part of my life." Some secrets, once revealed, don't just change the future. They rewrite the entire past, making sense of a lifetime of confusion and pain. And sometimes, that clarity is exactly what you need to build a better tomorrow. The Forbes article hit newsstands on a Tuesday morning in November. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, partnership proposals, and congratulations from colleagues across the industry. The cover photo showed me in my conference room, arms crossed confidently, with the headline, "The $50 million Woman, How Amanda Walsh Built Her Empire from Nothing." From nothing. The phrase felt more accurate than the journalist had probably intended. I was reviewing acquisition offers when my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Amanda, there's a gentleman on line 3 who says he's your father, but not the father who's been calling all week." My heart stopped. Did he give a name? "Thomas Bradley. He says he read your Forbes interview and needs to speak with you about family matters." With shaking hands, I picked up the phone. "This is Amanda." "Amanda?" The voice was warm, slightly nervous, and completely unfamiliar. "My name is Thomas Bradley. I believe I'm your biological father." The words I'd been hoping and dreading to hear in equal measure. "How do you know?" "I saw your photo in Forbes, and you look exactly like my mother did at your age." Same eyes, same smile. "When I read that your mother was Margaret Walsh from Denver, everything clicked into place." He explained the story Emma's eavesdropping had only partially revealed. He and my mother had dated seriously in college, had talked about marriage, had planned a future together. When she got pregnant, she'd be ecstatic. He'd been terrified, but committed. Then one day she disappeared, Thomas continued. Left school, moved back home, wouldn't return my calls. I hired a private investigator to find her, but by the time I tracked her down, she was married to David Walsh and wouldn't see me. "Did you know she was pregnant with me?" "I suspected, but I could never prove it. The investigator told me she'd had a baby, but the birth certificate listed David Walsh as the father. I assumed I was wrong about the timing." "You weren't wrong." The silence stretched between us, 28 years of missed connection. "I've thought about you constantly," he said finally. "Wondered if you existed, what you were like, whether you were happy. When I saw that Forbes article, saw what you'd accomplished, I was so proud I cried. Proud. A stranger was proud of me, while the man who'd raised me had spent decades viewing my achievements as inconveniences." "Would you like to meet?" Thomas asked. "I understand if you need time to process this, but I'd love the chance to know you, if you're open to it." We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. Thomas Bradley turned out to be a software engineer, recently retired, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put me immediately at ease. He'd never married, never had other children. "I always hoped that someday you might want to know me," he admitted over coffee. "But I never wanted to disrupt your life if you were happy with your family." "Happy with my family," I repeated, testing the phrase. "That's complicated." I told him about the textbook money, about years of feeling invisible, about Saturday's dinner disaster. His expression grew progressively more troubled. "They treated you like that while you were building a $50 million company?" "They treated me like that my entire life." "Amanda, that's unconscionable. You deserved so much better." The validation from this stranger, who was actually my father, Felt like cold water on a burn I'd carried for decades. That evening, I called David Walsh. Not Dad. David. Amanda, thank God. We need to talk about Saturday night. Your mother and I think you misunderstood our intentions. Actually, David, I think I understood perfectly. David? His voice was sharp. What's gotten into you? I know the truth. I know you're not my biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. Who told you that? Does it matter? The point is, I know, and now everything makes sense. 28 years of wondering why I never felt like I belonged in this family, and it turns out I don't. Amanda, please. You're still our daughter. We raised you. We love you. You tolerated me. There's a difference. That's not fair. Fair? The laugh that escaped me was harsh. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been treating the daughter you chose to raise with the same love you showed your biological daughter. Fair would have been supporting my education the way you supported Emma's. Fair would have been celebrating my success instead of trying to figure out how to redistribute it. We made mistakes, David admitted quietly. You made choices, and now I'm making mine. I hung up and immediately called Thomas Bradley. I'd like to have dinner this week if you're available. I'd like to get to know my real father. The next morning brought a furious call from my mother. How dare you go behind our backs to find that man? Do you have any idea what this could do to our family? Your family, I corrected. And frankly, Margaret, I don't care what it does to your family. You should have thought about family consequences 28 years ago, when you decided to lie to everyone involved. We were protecting you. You were protecting yourselves. Don't pretend this was about me. That afternoon, David showed up at my office unannounced, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. I came to apologize, he said without preamble, and to ask for a chance to explain. Explain what? 28 years of treating me like a burden? I tried to love you like my own daughter, I really did. But every time I looked at you, I saw him. I saw the man your mother chose first. The one she loved before she settled for me. The honesty was brutal and raw. So you punished me for your insecurity? I know it was wrong. I know I failed you. But Amanda, you're still my daughter in every way that matters. No, I said quietly. I'm not. I never was. You made that clear in 1,000 small ways over the years. What about Emma? She loves you. Don't let our mistakes destroy your relationship with your sister. Emma is the only family member I plan to keep in contact with. She's the only one who ever truly saw me as belonging. David's shoulders sagged. So that's it? You're cutting us out completely? I'm choosing to prioritize relationships with people who value me. You've never valued me, David. You've tolerated me, provided for me legally, but you've never valued me. And if we try to change? If we do better? I thought about the question seriously. Could years of emotional neglect be undone? Could relationships built on resentment and obligation transform into something genuine? Maybe someday, I said finally, but not now. Right now, I need space to build relationships with people who want me in their lives unconditionally. As David left, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete clarity about my worth and my boundaries. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own family based on love and respect, rather than obligation and biology. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. 6 months later, I stood in the garden of Thomas Bradley's home in Boulder, watching him teach Emma how to grow heirloom tomatoes. She'd driven up for our monthly family dinner, a tradition we'd started in March. Family had taken on an entirely new meaning. Thomas and I had built a relationship slowly, carefully, without the weight of obligation or expectation. He was interested in my work because he genuinely cared about my happiness, not because he wanted to benefit from my success. He shared stories about his career, his travels, his interests, treating me like a friend he was getting to know, rather than a daughter he had rights to. Emma had embraced our new family dynamic with characteristic grace. She visited Boulder regularly and had formed her own friendship with Thomas, who encouraged her architectural ambitions with the same enthusiasm he showed for my entrepreneurial ventures. Your tomatoes are going to be amazing this year, Thomas told Emma, his hands covered in soil. You have a natural intuition for growing things. I wonder where I get that from, Emma replied, grinning at me. Amanda's always been the one who could make anything grow. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. The acquisition closed. We're officially part of Tech Genesis, and you're officially worth $50 million. Time to celebrate. I'd decided to sell Momentum to Tech Genesis, a larger tech company that would give us the resources to scale globally, while preserving our company culture. My partners and I would stay on to lead the expansion, but now we'd have the backing to reach our full potential. Good news? Thomas asked, noticing my smile. The sale finalized. We're official millionaires now. Emma whooped and hugged me, getting garden soil all over my shirt. Thomas beamed with pride. the same expression I'd hoped to see on David Walsh's face for 28 years. "I'm so proud of you," he said simply, and the words carried weight because they came from genuine love rather than obligation. My personal phone rang. David Walsh. I'd been declining his calls for months, but something made me answer this one. "Amanda?" His voice was hesitant, smaller than I remembered. "What do you want, David?" "I saw the news about your company sale. Congratulations." "Thank you. I also wanted you to know that your mother and I have started counseling. We're trying to understand where we went wrong with you." The admission surprised me. "That's good. You should understand your mistakes. Would you consider meeting with us, with a therapist present? Not to reconcile necessarily, but to talk about what happened?" I looked at Thomas and Emma, both giving me encouraging nods. They'd supported whatever decision I made about David and Margaret Walsh, never pressuring me to forgive or forget. "Maybe," I said finally, "but only if you understand that talking doesn't guarantee anything. I've built a family that works for me now. I understand. I just want the chance to acknowledge the harm we caused." After I hung up, Thomas put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Healing doesn't require reconciliation, but sometimes it allows it." "I'm not ready yet," I admitted. "And that's perfectly fine. Family isn't just about blood or obligation, Amanda. It's about mutual love and respect. You get to choose who deserves access to your life." That evening, we sat on Thomas's porch watching the sunset over the Rockies, eating Emma's first successful attempt at homemade bread. My phone stayed silent, no demands for my time or energy, no guilt about family obligations I'd never asked for. Emma had inherited our mother's recipe book and was working her way through it systematically, determined to master every dish that had been in our family for generations. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was preserving Walsh family traditions while I was building something entirely new. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly, cutting them off. "Sometimes I regret how it happened," I said honestly, "but I don't regret choosing to prioritize relationships that lift me up instead of tear me down." "You taught me something important," Emma continued. "You taught me that family shouldn't come with conditions. When I have kids someday, I want them to know they're valued for who they are, not for what they can provide." Thomas nodded approvingly. "The best thing we can do with pain is learn from it and do better with the next generation." As the stars emerged over Boulder, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life built on my own terms. The girl who'd been refused $200 for textbooks had built a company worth $50 million. The daughter who'd never felt valued had found a father who treasured her unconditionally. The sister who'd been taken for granted had maintained the one family relationship that had always been genuine. Success, I'd discovered, wasn't just about financial achievement. It was about surrounding yourself with people who celebrated your victories without trying to claim credit, who supported your dreams without attempting to redirect them, who loved you without conditions or expectations. Some families are accidents of birth. Others are careful constructions of choice, built person by person, relationship by relationship, until you find yourself surrounded by exactly the love you deserve. I'd finally built both kinds of success, and neither required the approval of people who'd never seen my worth. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of overcoming family expectations and building the life you deserve. Remember, you get to choose who deserves access to your heart, your energy, and your success. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is create the family you should have had all along.